I want to take a brief second to go through some of the tools I've made for building AK parts kits. I apologize for the noise, but it's super hot in here and I want to kick the fan on. So, what a lot of people don't realize is that you can buy your way to victory, but you can also build a lot of these things with a little bit of scrap material. And I got a whole bin full of just cutoffs, blocks, all sorts of different things that I've made or I've kept to make these type of things. So to start off, I think one of the biggest problems I had in getting barrels populated while the trunnion's installed into the receiver. These are just Polish parts I've pulled out of my one of my kits just to demonstrate here. But I used to have a block that kind of balanced on the trunnion ears here. You can do it that way, and I had it standing up like this in the press. You can do it that way, but what you really need is 3 points of contact at all times in order to keep this thing straight. So that's on this part of the trunnion, underneath the bullet guide, and on this ear right there. So what I came up with was basically a bootleg copy of AK Builder's Trunnion Support plate, I guess you'd call it. I took some pieces of a grade 8 bolt and a flat piece of thick plate. This all came out of a government contractor's scrap cutoff. So I know a lot of welders and pipe fitters out there, and I mean these things. Actually, these plates in particular, these were shipping, or I don't know what you call them, support plates that went between the pallet itself and the equipment, and they were going to throw these out. So, I was able to take possession of these things without a problem. But basically cutting into a T-shape, again, if you look at how some of the professional tools are built, you can get a general idea as to how to recreate them. So in this case, if we look at our Polish trunnion and rear side block, and this is actually a good example here because it still has the receiver riveted to it. So this is a good demonstration. You simply align it as best you can. There we go. I hope my vise can hold it. Let me crank that down a little. Now you'll notice you have those 3 points of contact that I was talking about. And basically you're not forcing the pressure from the press into one localized area. So everything's balanced and you can keep everything in line. So really, the only thing you need to make sure you get correct when you build this type of thing, get your distance correct. And I gauged everything based off of the height here and the contact here using a level. This isn't 100% perfectly dead nuts level because it was built kind of on the fly, but it worked, so I didn't worry about it. I put a groove into the bottom pin here. Again, that was just a piece of grade 8 bolt. And I stick welded this whole thing, so you don't even have to get super fancy with how you build these things. Honestly, you could probably just drill holes and tap it, but I did a blind hole, so that way this pin has nowhere to go, in the weird event that it wants to force itself out the bottom, because it physically can't. So again, I'm getting this middle pin here in between the bottom lip of the trunnion and the bullet guide itself. What you just kind of want to be careful of, if you have this thing kind of leaning forward or backward like that, you would be putting unnecessary and unbalanced pressure on the bullet guide and potentially popping that out. So get your measurements right here. Measure 3 times, cut once, that whole sort of deal. Since we're on the front trunnion anyway, let's look at how I typically press barrel pins in and out. I'll either use, I have this cup tool here. This is just a piece of end cap. I've shown this before on my press video that I did a while back, but I just bored out a hole in the center here, have a set screw for the 1-inch ram, this is 1-inch cap, and I shape these steel bolts to basically be pin pressers. I got a couple of them. It's the same size bolt, but the end pin, it's sized differently for the purpose at hand. So I've used them to push out stubborn front sight and rear sight pins instead of having to drill them out. You got to be careful when you do that, though. It does work, especially when you have a 20-ton press. But in conjunction with that, I use this nut here, and I don't remember the size off the top of my head. You could remake this in brass, but personally I'd rather use steel so that way it doesn't collapse on me. And what I did was I made a groove here, and what this groove corresponds with is the dip right here on the trunnion ear itself. I just set that there. There's a hole through where the pin can fall out. And what this does is that, combined with the pressure from the ram itself, this will actually balance on its own. I don't know if I can show one-handed. This will actually balance like that. I would personally put like a piece of wood to support the barrel just to keep things, nice and straight. Because if by chance this does fail and want to slip out, it will shoot out. So you do want to be careful with it. But this was just, a 20-cent part. You don't have to buy the whole barrel pin jigs. Not to say that they're not good tools. They're great tools, actually. I know plenty of people that use them. But, I didn't splurge out on all of the jigs. I got the drill jigs and the rivet squeezers, but that's really about it. For barrel population or depopulation, if you're trying to demill this, gas blocks can be kind of annoying because you don't have a whole lot of places to bite on it. So what I do is, if I can balance that somewhere. Shit, that's not going to work very well. Let's see here. Screw it. I'll get my point across. I use sections of pipe. I will probably put the size in the description. But it's just plain old black iron, nothing crazy. And I have a section cut out of it. And what this will do is this allows me to slip it through the barrel, and what I'll do is I'll turn it to one side. This isn't a super good example here because this one in particular, it's sized for milled spec barrels, fatter barrels, so I need to dig out the other one that I have for regular AKM barrels, but you get the point here. The key is you want to keep contact surface at all times in these two locations. And keep it nice and tight when you go to put it on the press plate. And square both ends, because if you got one side that's really off, your press and your jig setup is not going to be in line. And if it's not in line, things get caught or they shoot out. Bad things tend to happen. Little pieces, and you can cut these things to different sizes and lengths depending on your need. Brass nuts, pennies, that's a pretty old school way of doing it. Or if you want, you can get that brass puck that I think Requiem Arms makes and Apex sells it. This guy right here, I use this to push out barrels when the trunnion is already installed in the receiver and I can't get anything else in there. You'll notice this is offset. This is a piece of Arasaka barrel, trainer barrel, that I had laying around. I cut it up, just stick welded this together. I usually use this in conjunction with, obviously, with a brass nut. And this just sits in right here, like that. And this is short enough to where it clears the ejector and you won't break anything that way. For barrel population, we got, again, the same size pipe, but I have a copper end cap on here. And the reason for this is, one, not to mar up the parts, but also, if something's wrong, and I had this happen to me on the Mac 90 conversion, where my gas block, the Polish gas blocks that you buy out there, that are unfinished, are not reading the spec. And I misread my measurements because, again, I just wasn't paying attention. What will happen is the copper will deform first before it destroys or bends your barrel, hopefully. If your barrel will start to gall a little bit, depending on how much pressure you have on it, I have a 20-ton press, so that's kind of what started happening to mine. But I stopped when I noticed that, one, the gas block wasn't going anywhere, but the copper had kind of squished itself down. That's an indicator that you probably need to stop and reassess. But assuming everything's in spec, you just slip this through the barrel. You know, obviously, you haven't put your front sight on yet, and you basically have a good surface area for this thing to grab onto and start pressing your gas block on. And you know, you'll have to readjust your arbor plates to accommodate the height. But what if the pipe you made is too short? That's no problem. Take another piece of cutoff, stack it on there. Isn't a big deal. Just make sure you square off these ends. Alternatively, if for some reason you can't use this, but you still have to get the pipe through, you could probably round this end off or use a piece of plastic. I kept the plastic cap. You can see it's kind of already deformed itself a little bit. Or just bore this out a little bit, this end piece. Bore that out so that way it slides over the barrel journals. And finally, obviously I've kind of alluded to this, but you need solid press plates. Don't stick with the Harbor Freight crap that you get, because there's a lot of rolling, and it's just not very good. that I've seen with getting parts situated and stable. So I got these press plates. I've cut this out a little bit again for Chinese barrels, but I'll use this for AKM stuff too, and it's actually still good to where you have contact surface between the sides on the barrel of the rear side, but you're not on the weak portion where you could cave that in. And as long as it's straight, and you're not dealing with something particularly annoying like a Romanian barrel, again, Chinese barrels, which are, you know, most of the time when I see Chinese barrel components, they galled them on the way in. That's just how they built them. But even then, heat and hitting the ram with a brass mallet and introducing impact to the ram, don't need to wail on it. Just give it a slight tap with a mallet, and it should pop loose. I got an assortment of scrap. You just never know when you need something oddly shaped, or you need to cut something up that's oddly shaped. I've used this for just, you know, when I don't have the trunnion in the receiver, maybe I'm head spacing. Slip that in there again. Put a brass nut there or a penny there. I use this to get the barrel in and out before I put it in the receiver. Works every time. Again, cutoffs, pieces of copper, you know, steel nuts. You never really know what you're going to need. So keep all of your cutoffs. Don't throw anything away. Curved pieces, different sized press plates. I use this tool right here for taking off the rear sights, the rear sight leaf. So there's a $2 set of pliers that I modified. And basically, you have a pretty good start to AK barrel population, demilling, and head spacing. So again, if I had to recommend tools to buy that I couldn't make. You can make these things too, by the way. I've seen it done. The rivet jig, because I'm lazy, and it's a good tool, works just fine. The trigger guard rivet jig, I tried to make my own. Again, I'm lazy, so by the time I had all this other stuff made, I just went ahead and bought the damn thing. And the drill jig. That one you sort of kind of need. You can screw up a lot on an AK, but as I showed you in the last video, doing things quick versus doing things the right way. The fire control group holes aren't really things you can wiggle on. You really need to get that right the first time. Otherwise, you get to do what I do, and you get to re-weld and try again, and potentially risk making your gun look worse. So this should get you kind of started as to, you know, what kind of tools you may want to think about making. If you have some scrap material, what tools that you actually shouldn't cheap out on and buy.